Thank you.
Okay, full disclosure, I am completely in love with this woman. I have been. We met more than 30 years ago at a pool party, as one does, and I've been in love with her ever since, more so now than that day. And as I was reading the books, because I do know Anjelica fairly well, what hit me was the size, the kind of epic, mythic, just legendary size of the life, the big life that Anjelica has led and lives, and also the intimate person that we know, which seems like a contradiction, and it's really rare, but it's spectacular because she's also a dear friend, loyal, loving, and so there's this smaller life that she lives parallel to and at the same time as the life in the book, which is, to me, spectacular. And the contradictions within her, all of which I've never got to say to her, quite frankly, meaning, glamorous and practical and magical and at the same time, completely logical, and all these things that I rarely see in one person, I see in Anjelica, and so it's a joy to actually do this tonight, to get to talk to her.
Thank you, Mitch, so much.
And we spoke beforehand, today was a sad day because, all of us fans of film lost a genius, and Mike Nichols, and in Anjelica's case, a dear friend. And as I was reading the book, I saw that they had met, I believe, in 1973, or in New York City, and I know that you just saw Mike last week.
Yeah, I was just in New York for the beginning of my book tour, and I was with Mike a week ago, happier than he'd ever been in his life. We sat side by side, and we laughed and giggled all night, and he was madly in love with Diane Sawyer. Told me he was happier than he'd ever been. So I feel very good, but I'd like to take a moment for us all to remember this great man of the theater.
And I do remember you calling from New York. You'd just seen Death of a Salesman, his production of Death of a Salesman, with Mike.
Yeah.
And calling, saying that was just an incredible night. I mean, just
fantastic. And he was one of those people who just got better as he went along, and was always hard on himself. But some of Mike's productions were just unbelievable. And when you think that one of those early films was The Graduate, I think it was the first film I saw of Mike Nichols, and then Carnal Knowledge, and all of these incredibly varied movies. He was fantastic, fantastic human being.
Well, one of the things that occurred to me when I was reading the book, and just pure jealousy because I wasn't here, was the way you described California in the early 70s. I mean, you had a beautiful quote, which was every person I met at that time seemed touched by a particular madness. And I thought it seemed dead accurate from my fantasy of what the place was like and reading the book and stuff. But if you were thinking about it now, where do you think that madness came from? Was it youth, or the group of people you were with, or the time, the generation?
I think all of those things, Mitch. I think the possibilities were endless, and all kinds of things were happening, like Esalen in California. I remember those very interesting cults happening, and at the same time there was a sense of movies, of the Nouvelle Vague just hitting California, and a real sense of the acceptance of foreign filmmakers and excitement about that, and just the way in which people were living. I'd been living I grew up in Ireland, and I went to school in England, and then I spent 4 years in New York being a fashion model and going back and forth to Europe, but coming to California was like entering a new zone. It was so beautiful. I remember just thinking, wow, this is the place. It was so verdant, and everyone here was in a good mood, and they kind of hung out in caftans. And I thought, this is heaven. You don't even have to do much here. You just get to be beautiful and loved.
And happy.
It's perfect.
Yeah. And you were kind of grooved into, from, you know, your father's wife, Cece, and in the book, other kind of groups of friends that you'd made in London and stuff that were here. People were moving here from
That's right. A lot of people were moving here from New York because it was the land of milk and honey. And I mean, after New York, after a grim New York winter, you throw off those clothes.
Go insane. Just
bask in the sun and go to the beach and, you know, listen to the Beach Boys, and it was all good. Yeah, it was a very novel way of living, and of course, everyone was beautiful in California. Everyone had a suntan, and they looked great, and they were up for anything. No one did much, so you could stay up really late at night and have a whole lot of fun.
Wake up late the next day, yes.
Yeah.
That's why I was jealous. And you were coming here, you know, you were incredibly young at the time, and coming, you know, as the last book ended, out of a really traumatic kind of, you know, kind of a intense relationship with a photographer in New York, and so it must have felt like, you know, a release and also a refuge, and you were protected here and all that stuff. But there was no, at that time, there was no work agenda from you. When I read the book, it feels like you just really just were happy to be here, and this was going to be fun. And
that's right. I'd gone on this holiday to Mexico with my father, who decided to sort of try to approve of my then boyfriend, who was some 22 years older than I was, and basically a bipolar schizophrenic. I say this laughing, but and anyway, as fate would have it, at the end of book one, we have this terrible kind of quarrel in Mexico, and we fly back to California, and I'm supposed to go on back to New York with Bob Richardson, who is the name of the boyfriend. And I decided to part with him the night before, and it was a night of torture, but anyway, when we arrived at LAX, and we were standing there by the baggage carousel, I decided there was no way that I was going to go on back to New York with him. And when he extended his hand, I said, if you were the last person in the world, I wouldn't shake it. And I went home, home with my new stepmother and my father to the Pacific Palisades and started a new life. Just
dove in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a very liberating time.
Had you, I mean, I always wondered, I mean, when I was reading the first book, I couldn't really pick up on two things. One, had you spent much time out here when your dad was working on movies, or, because he was also on location in different places, it seemed?
No, I think I'd been here once when he was shooting The List of Adrian Messenger. And I remember coming out, and I think he might even have been at one point planning The Misfits, and I came out to visit with my mother. But I didn't spend any time in California. I was born here, but I didn't spend any time here growing up.
So it was new.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it seemed, you know, from reading it, that you met Jack Nicholson fairly quickly. At least in the book, it felt compressed.
Page 7.
I was on page 137, so I mean, it's like a long time after that.
No, it was funny the other day because people are apt to kind of come in immediately with that question. So what about Jack? Like, you know, I haven't had any life after or before. And I found myself getting a bit defensive. And then the interviewer said, well, it's on like page 2.
You wrote it.
Okay,
yeah.
I guess. I'll talk about it.
Well, yeah, and we'll get back to it. But the thing that was interesting to me, Well, one of the things that was really impressive to me was when we met, you know, you and Jack were a couple, and it was around 1980, early 80s, and you hadn't really worked much, and at the time, you seemed very kind of sanguine about that. I mean, in the book, it seems like it wasn't quite so calm, but meaning being, you know, part of that couple, which was, you know, iconic, and you know, before we met, you know, Jack and Anjelica was like one word almost, but the way it appeared to meet you, it felt like you were comfortable in that role or whatever, but in the book, it seems like there was a little bit more stress about, there became a little bit more stress about wanting to present yourself as doing your own thing.
Yeah, well, living with Jack was sort of a combination of a wonderful sense of ease and waking up quite late. You know, Jack had quite a busy agenda, and that everyone in the world wanted to work with him. My own agenda was a little bit more, no, it was a little bit less. I wanted to act, but I'd acted in a movie with my father directing when I was 16. That wasn't a very pleasant experience, and it took me a while to get my courage back up. I didn't have a lot of confidence, and after Jack and I met and got together, actually, you know, it wasn't hard to lie around his beautiful house up on Mulholland Drive, soaking in the rays and, you know, going to great rock and roll concerts.
You seemed good with it.
I had a pretty good time. It's hard to complain. You know, I wanted to work. But that was sort of the ethos of the 70s for me, was mostly kind of going to great places and having a good time with Jack. It wasn't hard. The problem was, for me, was that I do have this kind of strange underlying ambition that caused me to sometimes want to rebel against the easy life, or wanted to challenge myself a bit more.
Well, it was the like I said, the contrast in you that's so amazing. But I remember at the time thinking, when we met, it was shortly after that you got Ice Pirates, and you know, your pride in it and kind of like working actor kind of energy about it was really impressive to me. It was sort of, you know, it was clearly that kind of movie. It was a science fiction movie, whatever, you know, you called it a B movie in the book and all that. But I mean, we'd already just started to know each other, and I thought it was so cool that you were taking the sword fighting lessons and you were in it, and it was, you know, I just loved the way you dealt with it as a working actor. There was no...
Thank you, Mitch. Actually, I really liked that part. I got to play the best swordswoman in the universe. It was really good. And John Matuzak was playing my love interest. So it was kind of amusing. I had a good time on that film. And it was the first time that I had a real part that came to me in a way other than through my father, through my boyfriend. It came to me through the producer, John Foreman, who'd made Man Who Would Be King with my dad. And John, for some reason, liked me and wanted to do me a favor, and so he had me, you know, try out for the part. And I was quite stimulated by the idea of playing this woman. And I think I gave a quite good audition. So it was great. He gave me that responsibility. He was always good to me, Foreman. He was the one who came to me with Richard Condon's book, Prizzi's Honor.
And in your book, one of the things that happened around that time was that you started to work with Peggy Fury, and I thought it was interesting that you hadn't, I mean, that was like really your first, you'd done one acting, I think someone turned you on something that wasn't so great. And can you discuss what it was that was exciting and different about Peggy? And I mean, clearly as a person, she became real important in your life, but it seemed to trigger a whole change in the work and everything.
Well, I had a friend at the time, Greta Ronigan, and I'd gone to a few acting classes, including one class in the Valley where, you know, all of these people, all of these students were laying around on the floor, and this big white poodle was going around sniffing up all the girls' dresses, and I thought, oh, this is terrible, you know, this guy is awful. And I ranted, and this very nice man who's a friend of Jack's, Harry Gittes, brought me to this class, and I was just appalled. And finally, at the end of my telling him, Harry, how could you do this? You know, how could you bring me to this thing? He said, I was just trying to, you know, inspire you in some way. And then I felt terrible. But anyway, I talked to Greta about this, and she said, maybe you'd like this woman that I've been studying with, or that I studied with, who frankly, I think is really a genius. And I said, well, I'd be very happy to meet her. And that's how I came to be introduced to Peggy Fury. Peggy was, above all things, Irish and dreamy and romantic, and she was all about feeling, and she had great humor, beautiful legs, I remember too. She was just the perfect person for me at the time. She understood where I was coming from. In one of our early conversations, there was some kind of improv where I had to get a dime from the other character, and I remember, you know, kind of weeping and going down on my knees and stuff. And at the end of this, she said, you know, Anjelica, you're a tall and imposing girl, and if you ask for something, we're inclined to give it to you. I was like, oh. And so she awakened in me this idea that I deserve things. I didn't have to beg for things. And that was a curious kind of confidence. And she was just really complicit. She was like a really, you know, how when thieves are having a really good time,
You're
they're
together,
like,
yeah.
counting their treasure. That's how I felt with Peggy. Just her knowledge and her enjoyment of good work, and just the way she checked in with me. It was an unspoken love affair, but I adored Peggy.
And it gave you kind of confidence and strength going in to go back into work and around that same time?
Yeah, and I made her laugh, and I was the oldest person in her sort of junior class at the time, or her junior class at the time, yeah. I was already, you know, touching 30, and most of the people in the class were in their early 20s, but you know, she didn't make me feel any shame, and she just pointed me in interesting directions, and she was funny.
That's what you need. Yeah. And then, I mean, when I was reading the book, I thought it was interesting, all of it, but there's a moment where you go to visit Jack on the set of Chinatown, and the dynamics of you know, visiting someone else's set, and it was your father and Jack, you know, in the movie, obviously, and you described that scene of sitting down between the two of them, and Harry Dean being there and all that, and your father doing a line from the movie?
Yeah, I was invited to set. I can't remember whether it was Dad or Jack who said, come along to lunch, and you know, I arrived kind of. And I don't like being on anyone else's set. I don't even like being on sets of movies that I'm working on if I'm not working that day. I'm very wary about walking in on other people's scenes and stuff. So they were in an orchard at a long wooden table, and Dad was seated across the table, and I sat down next to Jack, and Roman was at the head of the table, and lunch was being served, and Dad kind of drew back like this and said, I hear "You've been sleeping with my daughter." There's this long, weighty pause. "Mr. Gitz." So I was like, "Oh my God." And everyone had a good laugh at my expense.
Funny man. That's a good laugh. But it leads me to Prizzi's honor in the recreation of that triangle. I mean, working with the two of them. And in the book, you get a sense of how you respond to the material instantly, but and obviously the dream of the cast and working with your father and all that. But there was hesitation as to how it was going to play out and which side of it you were going to be on, and how much was expected of you to arrange. And I mean, you talk about a trip going down to Mexico that you refused to go on. And
well, John Foreman, who I was talking about before, having given me the book, Prizzi's Honor, said to me the next day, "So what do you think about Mayrose Prizzi?" And I went, "It's great. It's a fantastic part." And he said, "What do you think about your dad to direct and Jack to co-star?" And I went, "Oh, no." But I knew at that point that, this one would be really foolish to turn down. But on the other hand, when he said, "Okay, we have to go down to Mexico to talk to your father. We've got to get Jack down to Mexico." And I said, "John, I'm not going to go down to Mexico to persuade Jack to work with Dad. I just don't want to be in the middle of this." He said, "What do you mean? You want to get this done?" I said, "If I go down to Mexico, I'm going to hear Jack's problems with Dad, Dad's problems with Jack. I'm going to be sandwiched between these two big rocks. I don't want to do it." He said, "I'll see you tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. Be ready. We're going down to Puerto Vallarta." I said, "I'm not going." 6 o'clock in the morning, he shows up on my doorstep. I'm in my nightdress. He says, "What? You're not ready?" I said, "I told you I'm not going. I'm not going to do it." Anyway, we had a brief argument. He turned on his heel, down my drive, left for Puerto Vallarta. When he arrived at the airport, he found Jack buying huaraches in the shop at the airport, thrilled. He and Dad had spent the better part of 4 days watching young female gymnasts on the satellite field for the Olympics, had basically fallen in love and agreed to do Prizzi's Honor, which Jack now understood was a comedy. He'd never known it was a comedy. And I think he hadn't quite agreed to wear a wig, but Dad had him like under his thumb. The whole thing was set. So it was great.
You did
it
your
all
job.
got done. Yeah, I did my job.
It's amazing.
It was not to show up.
I remember seeing you in New York around that time with Layla, our mutual friend, and at dinners, Raul's and Mary Lou's and stuff. And I remember being amazed at how it seemed, and you tell me what you were thinking, that there was I didn't see any anxiety or pressure or nervousness. Those nights felt really normal. And this is right before you're about to shoot, and even a couple days into it. And truthfully, I was nervous for you because it just seemed like the moment and the pressure of those two men and all of that. But you seemed completely into the character and cool. And
I was, but that's the way a great character is. It's only the ones that aren't very well written that make you really, really nervous, because you feel like you have to supply something. And it's something else to have a great script with great lines and one-liners like you want to do it on the Oriental. Look, could it be any better? And look, we have one here.
We have an Oriental, and
life could be worse. But yeah, that's why The Grifters was great too, because there was all this fantastic dialogue. And there's nothing better than great writing. It stops you thinking so much about yourself. You're not so self-conscious when you've got really good lines.
So you just jumped. I mean, The Grifters, the second you read it, you knew it was going to be.
The second I read
Lily
it,
was
I
amazing.
thought,
Yeah.
this is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, and when I was reading the book, something that occurred to me was, and as I said in the introduction, to go back a little bit, the kind of size and and the quality of your life. I mean, it's always been played out almost in an operatic way. I mean, you know, in the book you read the people that you're moving through, and there's a mythic quality to the group, to the collection of people. And I always wondered, is there a moment when you're in it and also aware of the size of it? You know, that you know, you're living your life, but you're going, okay, I'm in New York in 1973, and it's Mike Nichols and Jackie Onassis and Verushka and you know, David Bailey, and I'm going off to do a Halston show, and then going to, I mean, you're
Pretty
in it, but
heady stuff, yeah.
there is a time when you kind of...
Well, there is a time where you go, wait a minute. You know?
This is cool.
Yeah, this is great. And that time, I have to say, you know, the 70s and the late 70s, New York City, Los Angeles, was an extremely heady time and full of brilliant people and unusual people and things kind of emerging. Yes, I often, even though, you know, I have to say I was born to privilege, and I'm always aware of that. There are times where I go like,
This is amazing.
this is insane. I say in the book, you know, that some of these dinners, particularly in New York at Ara Gallant's house, where Mike Nichols would bring Jackie Onassis and Verushka would be there, were like those dinners that you put together in fantasy, where you say, you know, I'd like Winston Churchill and Liz Taylor to be at the table. But they truly were. They were like great, wonderful moments. And I'm still lucky enough to have those moments and to be part of, I think, the best years ever.
It's amazing.
I mean, Victorian times must have been great, and the turn of the century must have been fabulous, but nothing's ever been better than the way we've lived, Mitch.
No, it was
Let's
insane.
face it.
It's absolutely true. We're here, I mean, which is amazing.
And the fact we've survived, yeah.
And you know, in the book, the kind of circle of family, to jump ahead, but there are times when there were things in the book that were so, I mean, let's talk about, you know, briefly and not in any kind of TMZ way, but there's a quality to the guys that these amazing men that you've been with in your life, and you talk about it in the book. I mean, you actually talk about Jack and your father and Robert and Bob as, you know, seeing the similarities in them. Is it something that you were thinking of, you were aware of as it was happening, or only when you sat down for the book, or because they're wildly different men. I mean, the little I know of two of them,
But they're all
but they're all
gorgeous.
similar. Yeah, they're all impressive.
I love gorgeous men. That's why I'm talking to you on stage, Mitch. Yeah, they're just lovely. And I love gorgeous women too, but there's nothing to top a gorgeous man. And I had one as a father, and you know, it's true, you go on looking for them and finding them if you're lucky throughout your life. And I've been really lucky to have been with some spectacular men, really interesting types.
Dynamic. Yes, yes, historically,
Yeah.
for sure. One of the scenes in the book that I thought was so beautiful and, you know, literary. You know, I mean, the writing in the book is gorgeous, but and I am jumping wildly ahead, but it really made me cry. Actually, was the scene where you read The Dead to your father, and you're reading your brother's script, Tony, to your father, which it's something I didn't know you actually had done. The moment of it must have been incredible, and tell me what that felt like, or what that moment was like.
Well, Dad had a lot of medical problems over the last 15 years of his life. Actually, more than that, because he had emphysema. But at a certain point, he was at the Jules Stein Eye Clinic having cataracts removed, and I went to see him, and his eyes were bandaged, and he was in a darkened room, and I walked in, and my brother was there, my brother Tony, and he left shortly afterwards, and I sat with Dad for a little while, and he said, do you see a script on the bedside table, honey? And I said, yes. And he said, would you read it to me? I said, sure. And so I went over and turned on the lamp and opened the first page of the script, and it said, The Dead by James Joyce, screenplay by Tony Huston. I thought, that's odd. I never knew Tony was working on a screenplay for Dad. And Dad said, but will you read it to me? And I said, of course. And so I read him the script that was so beautiful. I'm sure you all know the story from the Dubliners, The Dead, but it's an epiphany set on the evening of the Epiphany, the eve of the Epiphany, in Dublin during a snowstorm. And it concerns these two women who are members of sort of a musical society, and they have visitors who come to their house in the Christmas season, and people sing and they dance and come together. And this one couple, Gabriel and Greta, come, and towards the end of the evening, he observes her listening to a song, and something about her reaction to this song kind of draws him, makes him curious. And when they go home to their hotel that night, the Gresham Hotel in Dublin, she reveals a story from her past that completely changes the way that he sees her. He sees her in a completely new light after this. So it's this very lyrical, but also very very deep story that starts off kind of as nothing and winds up as everything. Anyway, I was crying by the time I finished this script, and he said, "So should we do it?" And I said, "Yes, of course we'll do it." So it took maybe another year before we shot it, but that was my dad's last movie, and beautiful movie that I'm very proud to be in.
It's an incredible story, and the movie is gorgeous and perfect, but having read the two books, so few people, I mean, it's so cinematic, the way his last movie is something that you and Tony do together, and it's the Dubliners. I mean, it's, you know, the Irish, and I mean, you couldn't.
No, it was really amazing, and also Dad wasn't well enough to shoot it in Ireland, so we were in this warehouse near Magic Mountain, and all the Irish came over from the Abbey Theatre, you know, expecting Hollywood, and they were stuck out there in the middle of Valencia, playing cards and taking like line dancing lessons.
Perfect.
Cowboy two-step at the Black Angus, which we call the Black Anguish. They were like,
why are we here?
Why are we here? Well, they were there for John Huston. They were very sweet with him. And it was actually a kind of great setup because we were in a warehouse there. The sound wasn't wonderful because we were kind of in a jet path, but apart from that, we were self-contained. It was like being in a theater, and all these wonderful actors. It was really something. It was a self-contained little miracle.
It was beautiful to read, and I had no idea that you read him that script. I mean, I wish I'd been there for that. That's amazing. And I'd love to talk about, you know, you brought Robert Graham into our life, and a spectacular man, and you know, miss him daily. And what's beautiful in the book is the kind of surprise and romance, and you know, the different world that he exposed you to. apart from, kind of the normal path of life, the wrecking ball of Bob, the kind of spectacular, man that he was. It felt, at least in the reading of it, surprising and romantic, and at that point, after having been in the relationship with Jack, you were unprepared almost for him, for that to happen. At least that's the way it read.
Yeah, Bob came along as a big surprise, and he was a wonderful sculptor, but also a very interesting individual. And some people who've read the book say, well, finally you met somebody safe. But I wouldn't really describe Bob as the safest either. He was very unique. He was Mexican. He had a fantastically evolved, wouldn't you say? He was very evolved.
Elegant, yeah.
He was very elegant, but he also had a kind of mad side. He threw knives. He was completely unpredictable, but always extremely refined and thoughtful and graceful, just unique.
And an artist.
And a great artist.
Yeah, I remember the first time.
Very funny.
First time I met him was at, the night before my wife Wendy and I were to get married, and you and I had been friends for years, and he came up to the buffet. There was a party, like the night before party for my wedding, and he came over and stood next to me and said, "So you're in the business?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm a writer." And he went, and like walked away. I was like, well, that was lovely. And it took us like another 5 years to actually connect. But we did, it was great.
He and Mitch were really, they were really funny. We found ourselves on a plane going to Miami, and Mitch was there with his and Kelly's daughter, Shane, who was then adorable, like 13-year-old in a boater hat. And I was thrilled to see Mitch, and Bob was totally suspicious of Mitch. He wouldn't even look at him.
He was so mean.
I know.
It was incredible.
He was like looking at him through narrowed eyes. But then when they became friends, they were really dear friends.
It was incredible. And I love the things that you guys did, and the journey that just falling in love part that I'd heard snatches of, but it was so romantic and so, as I said, so unexpected. But it must have been, I don't know if they always say that stuff is cathartic. It was hard to read. I actually had the book for a while before I got to those chapters, and what was it like to have to revisit that?
Well, here's the thing about writing, which is that if you are writing about something that's sad, if you don't feel sad when you're writing about it, then you really feel bad. So in some way, it's good to feel blue about something that moves you a lot. Otherwise, why do it? On the other hand, yeah, it's hard to go to those places. It's hard because it hurts and makes you cry, but something about getting to those feelings and being able to describe those feelings in prose is very cathartic and very liberating, and also affords you an opportunity to really choose what those points of memory were, what the place looked like and how it smelled and how someone said something that maybe you didn't totally absorb the first time round and need to reabsorb. But I like the whole thing of writing. I like sitting down and kind of going back to those places, because nothing else in life really affords you that opportunity like writing. You can do it as an actor, with sense memory, and you can feel what it was and how something smelled, but something about depicting that in prose is it's a very special thing,
Yeah,
as
the
I'm
act of
sure
it, yeah.
you well know.
But and something and it probably is difficult to explain or maybe impossible to, but I've always been curious about the combination of, you know, you have an amazing strength and ability to endure, but not in the way some people do, which is to deny that the thing is happening, you know, that the sadness is there. I mean, you know, we've both gone through, as friends, you know, terrible grief, but I mean, I'm always amazingly impressed with, because you've had more than your share, how you take it in, you feel it, and then you move forward. And you know, in both books you reference that thing about your father saying you put your hand in your pockets and you walk away and all that, which is part of it. But what is it? Do you think it's you know, cultural, familial gift, or is something you've had to learn? Because I mean, it's not, some people just deny that the thing is happening and then they just soldier on but you don't do that. I mean, you called me when my mother was you know, killed in a car accident, because your mother had been, and you were sobbing on the phone, and it was incredibly helpful to me, but I, you know, you were feeling the pain almost as if I was, and then you move through these things. I mean, you endure.
That's, I think, why I'm so lucky to be an actress, because I kind of can channel these things. And, you know, life goes on, but we do suffer these wounds, and we have to live with these things, and we have to live with them at all times. There'll be times where, you know, you'll suffer more than others over these things, but they become part of you. You contain all of these issues, all of these moments, all of these arrows, and so you have to kind of absorb them. They become part of you. You become part of them, and the most we can do for each other, basically, isn't it, is to open our hearts and share our pain and our joy, and that's part of, you know, the celebration of being people and being human. We can do that, and we have the means with which to do that. So I think that's what kind of alleviates misery more than anything else, is the fact that we all do go through it, and we all can contact each other.
And be there, yeah.
And be there for each other, yeah.
Do you expect ever to you know, go back to Ireland, or to is there a pull for certain places? I know the ranch in the Sierras, and, you know, love it, but
yeah, I feel very passionately about Ireland, but it's an Ireland really that's past. When I go back to Ireland, I love it. I love my friends there, but I see that it's another life, and the life I knew and the life I grew up with my parents and our house there and the way things were, I can't replicate. It might be nice to have a cottage there. I don't know how often I'd get over. I'm not so crazy about flying. It's a long way to Ireland, but it's always part of my heart, and always with me, and my friends there are always with me.
what were the reactions to the first book?
Good overall. There was one group that reacted a little badly to a passage that I had to change, but apart from that, everyone was kind of gung-ho.
And what about this one? Because this is a tougher book in the sense that everybody's mostly still here and in town, and, you know, these are all your dear friends.
Yeah, I think overall people have been very nice about it. The ones who've read it, it's only been out since the 3rd, so
they can weigh in.
Yeah, they can weigh in. I so far, I think people have been very kind. Yeah.
And if have you thought about, has it been mentioned, or have you thought about either of these books ending up as movies?
Yeah, I've actually spoken to someone who'll remain fairly nameless until we make the announcement, but it's someone I'm really excited about.
To direct?
To act.
To act.
And she's kind of, she'd be a wish list person, so I'm very excited about that.
Who
I
is
hope
it?
it works. I can't tell.
Come on. Okay, later. Or not, probably
I'll whisper
never.
in your ear later.
And which leads me to, and then we can go to questions, leads me to directing, because you were one of the first, there was Lee Grant, and there have been, actresses as directors, but it's something you were really gifted at. I thought both movies were beautiful, and having done it once myself, there's good and bad to it, but as someone who, loves to read and adapt and the legacy of it, is this something you would pursue? Or
I'd love to make another movie. The truth is, though, that the two movies I've made, I've actually made three, but two that really counted, Bastard Out of Carolina and Agnes Brown, both had such a difficult time getting birthed that I'd love to make a movie with a really good producer who protected me, because on both movies I've had to fight tooth and nail to get what I wanted. Not that Jim Sheridan wasn't a good producer, but he's a better director, and
like John Foreman.
Yeah, like John Foreman, someone who just sort of covers you. That would be nice. Because I loved doing it, but you need someone in there with you. It's a lonely job, as I'm sure you can testify.
Yes, it's lonely and scary for
Yeah.
sure. Terrific, and thank you for this. But I think at some point we could open up to questions. And
yes, if you have questions, raise your hand, and I'll bring the microphone to you.
Hi, Anjelica.
Hi.
Hi, Mitch. I was wondering, can you speak a little bit about working with Raul Julia?
Sure. I made two movies with Raul Julia, Addams Family and Addams Family Values. Thank you. And he was a fantastic actor, lovely man, generous and funny and jolly, and I was always impressed with Raul. I mean, Raul came in to the studio and started playing with the kids first thing in the morning. When I was looking for my coffee. He was a very joyous, very gregarious, very happy person, and he loved singing opera for them. He became sick on the second Addams Family and Addams Family Values, and he never missed a day's work. We had tango lessons. He never complained. And he died shortly after he finished that movie. But he was really a fantastic person. I loved him very much.
there was that weird story about we were at dinner and at a restaurant we both love, and the maitre d' Dimitri came over and said that Raul had been in the night before, and that his eye had exploded out of his head and landed on the bar, and I thought it was just an insane story. And then you told me, and then I read it in the book, it actually did happen.
It actually happened. He showed up the next day with a really bloodshot eye. I said, "What happened, Raul? What happened?" He said, "My eye dropped out." I said, "Your eye dropped out?" He said, "Yes, on the counter. I was having a drink with Robert Palmer, and my eye dropped out." I said, "What did you do?" He said, "I took it and I put it back in." I said, "Did you go to the hospital?" He said, "Yes, the doctor told me I did the right thing." Wow, that's lucky. So next day, I ordered those fake glasses, the ones on springs from the joke store. The whole crew was wearing them. But I mean,
I thought it was a lie. It's crazy.
absolutely true.
Hello, Anjelica.
Hi.
Hi, it's such a pleasure to be in your presence again.
Thank you.
You're a fantastic writer and storyteller. Your prose is beautiful, and your humor is witty and very tongue-in-cheek. Have you considered writing fiction novels or honing in on your art skills, because you're a very natural artist, or so I've read?
Thank you. Yeah, I have. Now I'm getting more confident about it. I think I probably have to take some classes in fiction, but I love fiction, particularly kind of turn of the century breast beaters. Is that what they're called, breast beaters?
Or bodice rippers, or
Bodice
yeah.
rippers. I'd like to, yeah, I'd like
Something
to.
about the
I'd like
breast.
to write a bodice ripper.
But, you know,
Something better than that awful gray stuff.
But you could do those as well. Anjelica wrote me letters. When people wrote letters, you know, this is whatever, 15 years ago or something. And her writing is so beautiful, and obviously you can see it now in the books, that I mean, literally I'd write her back. It was so intimidating because it's apparently supposedly my job, and she was just killing me. I mean, the writing was spectacular. And so I agree. I mean, her literary style is, she doesn't need classes at all. You could teach.
Not really. But writing to Mitch is always inspirational, you know. It's great to write to a writer.
They were great letters. I saved them.
Me too.
Hi, Anjelica. I think you're right here.
Hi.
Right here? This way. Mikhail here.
There you are.
Mikhail here. Hi. I think you're the most amazing actress in the world. Family Pictures was incredible. 2 questions. Can you describe your experience on The Witches? And also,
sure.
what happened with Addams Family 3 when it went to Daryl Hannah?
I don't know what happened with Addams Family 3, I guess. I don't know. Did she do it?
Did it go to Daryl Hannah?
I don't know. It wasn't with the same group. Scott Rudin was the brilliant producer behind Addams Family 1 and 2, and Barry Sonnenfeld, the director, and I think what they did was so beautifully done, and it would be very hard to duplicate the kind of care and trouble they took with those movies. The Witches was such a great and subversive film. I was offered a development deal at MGM after Prizzi's Honor, and I kept trying to get them to read scripts that I had and talk to me about ideas that I had, and then it became evident that they had one idea, and that was Roald Dahl's The Witches, which they asked me to do with Nick Roeg. And when I heard it was going to be Nick Roeg, I was very excited because I loved his movies Don't Look Now, and I'd seen his movie Eureka. I thought he was a unique filmmaker. So I went to London. It was a Henson production, and Jim Henson's workshop was in Hampstead, and there were all these kind of brilliant nerds doing clockwork pieces with little mice, and that was interesting. And then the makeup began, and there were unbelievably complicated prosthetics, whole headpieces and humps, and it took about 7 hours to put on the prosthesis and 3 hours to take it off, which was a lot. For about 3 weeks, that's how I lived, incarcerated in rubber. And the hands, they created these hands where the tips of my fingers were the knuckles of the hands. But you couldn't take them off to go to the loo or anything because it would be an hour to put them back on. So my assistant had to pull down my tights and like go traipse off into the loo, you know, and come back, and she'd pull them back up, and that was my life for 3 weeks. And I had contact lenses of various sizes and apertures, and And those were problematic because I couldn't touch them myself because of the hands, and they had this guy who they call an eye expert. And so that wasn't too great. I got scratched retinas and everything, and they kept pumping this green smoke into my face, and then the contact lenses would turn green, and I'd think I was blind, but then I wasn't, so it was okay. But at the same time, I knew we were making something totally unique, something really, it was a kid's movie, but it was a dangerous kid's movie. There were little elements that were so Nick, and I knew that I was basically playing Hitler. That's who the Grand High Witch is. And so that's an interesting character to play.
Are kids
obviously.
still scared of you?
Yeah, they are. I still see them on the street, like in London when I'm there, and there'll be some child looks at me like this. And now they're older. Now they're like 28, and they're looking at me like, Witches fan.
Thank you so much, Anjelica, for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
I was a big fan of your father's and his father, and I wonder if you have any memories of Walter.
Unfortunately, I never met Walter. He died a year before I was born, like 2 weeks before my brother Tony was born.
Did your dad have any stories that you could share
Oh,
with us
lots
about
of
his
stories. He loved his dad, and they loved practical jokes, and they loved to make each other laugh. They were very good friends. But you see, I always thought my grandfather was that guy from Treasure of Sierra Madre, that little old prospector. And then when I came to America, I turned on the television one afternoon and watched a movie called Dodsworth, directed by Willie Wyler. And there was my grandfather, this beautiful,
gorgeous,
retired banker, very erudite, very gracious, lovely-looking man. And that's my grandpa. My grandpa's an actor. Thank you. Yeah, I think I'd really have gotten along with him because he seemed a bit more jovial than my dad. You know, my dad was a bit exacting and could be strict, but I could tell that Walter was really he was a happy, kind of a cheery person. And I think that was his role in my dad's life too. I think he gave my dad levity, made him less serious.
Hi, Anjelica. So I'm a huge Disney enthusiast, and I remember growing up in the 80s, and then just recently Disneyland and Disney World just brought back Captain EO, and you're in the final scene, and I was just wondering how it was working with Michael Jackson and Francis Ford Coppola.
Well, I was very excited when I heard from Francis Coppola that he wanted me to be in Captain EO. It was a 3-week job that was basically going to be a ride in Disneyland. And the story was kind of a video format. It was before videos became so ubiquitous. It was basically the storyline was Michael Jackson comes to my hideous planet. I play, I don't know, the Grand High Leader. I'm always the Grand High Witch or the Grand High Leader. Anyway, I'm strung up on the ceiling, and I come down and torture him, and then he sings to me and transforms my planet, and all is well. And it was great because, again, it was a lot of prosthetics and makeup, and this time I'm kind of strung up to the ceiling, which was hard on the back, particularly when Elizabeth Taylor came to visit Michael Jackson, and she was like, "Oh, Michael, why didn't you ask me to play the Grand High Leader?" I've heard nothing all her life but how awful her back was because she fell off her horse on National Velvet, and she's going, "Oh, I could do that." And I'm strung up there going, But anyway, I liked working with Michael. He couldn't show anger in rehearsal. That was the thing that struck me the most, was like, I would try to, actually Francis and I were both urging him to kind of show
back.
fight back. No. And his voice would just get higher. And like, oh, be gone from my planet, from your planet. No. But there was one day when they had me come in really early, like 5 o'clock in the morning, and the camera was going to be on Michael, and it was a 3D camera. So the lens was wider than the distance between you and I. It made no difference whether I was there or not, because if he were to be looking at me, he'd be in full profile because of the size of the camera lens. So I was feeling a bit, over it, particularly when he asked me to be in full makeup. The full thing with the coils and the rubber and then strung up on the ceiling. So I was like, really over it. So there I am. And they put him on a hydraulic platform, and he starts to sing, because he's going to transform my world. And all of a sudden, I was like, my jaw dropped. He was unbelievable. He was magic. And the minute he started singing and dancing, this power came out of him. It was like lightning bolts. You could see an aura around him. I literally was speechless. I couldn't, I was blown away. He was a genius. He was a genius.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Hello. I have 3 girls. My oldest is actually named Anjelica. So, and one of their favorite movies is Ever After.
I thought I was the...
And I was wondering how it felt to play the evil stepmother in the Cinderella,
Yeah, I like that part. I'm sorry, Bud. It was like 2 people started to talk at the same time. I know. It was really, I liked that. I was actually offered to look at that movie to direct. And I remember not really responding to it as a director, but then they asked me to play Rodmilla. And I was excited to work with Drew Barrymore, but more than anything, I really liked the take on that character, because it became evident to me that I would be able to show another side to her. And I have a theory about witches and wicked stepmothers, which is that, they're basically in agony. They've had a hard time. This woman had a terrible time. She had these 2 lovely daughters. Her original husband dies. She remarries. Really nice man. She goes to live in his lovely chateau, except it's in the country. She didn't want to be in the country. And he's got this girl who he favors, Cinderella. And I want my girls to get the attention. And then he goes and dies. So Rodmilla is furious, basically, and that's kind of the reason she's wicked and why she's down on Cinderella. And so no one really gets her side of the story. And that was fun to play, where's my sympathy?
You would get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love playing her. And I love playing, by the way, these characters for Disney, because, and I was playing the voice of Queen Clarion until quite recently. I don't know that there are going to be any more Tinkerbells, but I very much enjoyed that. And I love doing voices for animation, because you can do so much with a voice. It's an interesting process.
What was the redemption for Lily and the Grifters? Was there an element because she seemed amazingly dark.
She was very dark. You know, she's the fox that bites off her leg to save herself. Her leg being, you know, her son in this case. She murders her son, moves along. But there is no redemption. She's become
A survivor.
a ghoul.
Yeah.
She'll never.
That was a wild scene.
She'll never come above ground again. I don't think. And I love what Stephen Frears did. You know, in the last scene of the Grifters, He said, "I hope your dad won't mind if I borrow from the Maltese Falcon." That scene where Mary Astor goes down in the elevator. So that was an homage to John
beautiful.
Huston. Yeah.
2 more questions.
Oh, just one from me, thank you.
Hey, bud.
Anjelica, I'm watching you, and anytime I've ever seen you act, you move so sensationally, and I mentioned before about your extension, and you are the daughter of a ballerina. And I can't believe I've never asked you this before. I've known you for so long. Did you ever take any ballet classes when you were a child? Did you? Because nobody can stand like that without, you know, a real understanding of the thread, you know. I mean, your posture, your eloquence with your movement. I think you're one of the most beautifully moving actresses in the world, you know. I mean, and I think that probably has a lot to do with your mother on some level, no? 'Cause
Yeah.
we hear you talk about your dad a lot, you know. But I mean, I want to hear a little bit about your mother and her effect on you.
My mother was a very beautiful woman whose father was a yogi, actually. He'd come over to America in his 30s from Italy and taken up yoga, and I think he was quite hard on her, and when she proclaimed that she wanted to be a ballet dancer, he had her study at the New York City Ballet, and finally she became a dancer under Balanchine and danced with Jerome Robbins and had a fantastic career until she met my father and gave it all up. And I had babies. But yeah, I remember dancing with my mother when I was a very small child. We'd go out to Grandpa's house in Long Island and we'd dance on the sand together. We'd make these big grand jetés, you know. And then when I was in Ireland, she used to dance with me there, but there were no ballet schools, so I did Irish dancing, which is very, you know, quite stiff. You have lots of curls, but that came later when you go to these fesches in the countryside, and you have to kind of make your own costume and sew your medals on and everything. But I was always quite active, and I always had some sort of poise, I guess. And then when I went to London, again, I always danced. I always went to ballet class, and then I just loved dancing in general. I was always out dancing in clubs as soon as I was able, as soon as they let me. So yeah, I danced all my life. And I love to ice skate too, and ski and ride horses. So I always had good balance.
Our final question for the evening.
Hi, Anjelica. Just one question. I didn't know if you're working on anything right now or what's coming up next for you.
I'm going to do Love Letters in New York in January, which I'm excited about. It's a two-hander by Pete Gurney, directed by Greg Mosier. Mia Farrow did it with Brian Dennehy, and Candice Bergen and Alan Alda are doing it right now. I'm going to do it with Martin Sheen. It's a beautiful play. I'm excited to do it. And I have a movie that's going to come out at some point called Master Cleanse. That's a kind of subversive movie. It should be fun. And that's my immediate plan.
Well, thank you very much, Anjelica Huston.
Thank you.
Mitch Glazer.